afternoon, and welcome to the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. I'm Spencer Gross, Programs Manager and today's moderator, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's program, Y20 India 2023, a conversation with the U.S. delegates. We are joined today by Aaron Chan, Delegate for Youth, Democracy and Governments, Elizabeth Gamarra, Delegate for Peacebuilding and Reconciliation, and Pascal Rathle, Delegate for Future of Work, Industry 4.0, Innovation, and 21st Century Skills. For those of you who would like to submit questions for our panelists, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen where you can type in your questions. And I, or my colleague Rachel Kenderdine, will be managing question Q&A, which should start in about 35 minutes or so. Thank you all for being here, and I will jump right in. So first of all, thank you all so much for taking the time. I know we have multiple time zones. Some of our delegates are on the East Coast. Some of our delegates are in Japan. So we have a lot of different time zones. And so I thank you all for making the time at the various times of day. So I want to jump right into it. And I want to ask each of you just to quickly introduce yourselves and explain a little bit about what the Y20 is. Aaron, I'm going to start with you. You're on the left-hand side of my screen today.
Sure. Thank you, Spencer. Hi, everybody. My name is Aaron Chan. As Spencer mentioned, I was the U.S. Delegate for Youth in Democracy and Governance. I work for the Biden-Harris administration as a special assistant in FEMA for the Office of the Administrator. And before that, I worked in Congress, both the Senate and the House side. So pleasure to really be here. And to go back to your question, Spencer, the G20 is the world's 20 largest economies. It started in 1999 as a block of addressing trade and economic issues, but has kind of in the modern sense evolved way past that. So, just some quick statistics. The nations of the G20 account for more than 85% of global economic output, around 75% of all global exports, and about 80% of the world's population. So it's a pretty sizable block, and the Y20 is the advisory arm, the youth arm that meets ahead of the G20 every year.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aaron. Elizabeth, if you could tell our audience just a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, I'm Elizabeth. I am currently a junior researcher at the Peace Research Institute in Tokyo, and I'm also pursuing my own research through the Japan Foundation here. And my past experience involves international organizations like the OECD and the UN and other organizations similar to those. And so in terms of adding to the Y20 description of the Y20, I would add that every country selects youth representatives, and then they have over a span of time the opportunity to come up with policy recommendations and negotiate. So we get to meet people from all these countries and really try to be on the same page. My track was peace and reconciliation, so there was a lot of intersections. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And Pascal, last but not least, if you could introduce yourself to the group.
Well, Spencer, thank you so much. And the World Affairs Council LA, it's a privilege. That's where I actually got my first dose of foreign policy and international affairs in the Jacksonville, Florida World Affairs Council. So a quick shout out to them. Washington, D.C. based, professionally day to day. I spend my time in international economics, rethinking capitalism, and how to harness the potential of the private sector to drive better business and investment practices. My outside of work portfolio includes poetry, lots of travel, and from time to time, a good cappuccino. Beyond that, really, really privileged to have served with Aaron and Elizabeth, and also want to uplift our two other delegates who rounded out the 5-person team, Himaja, as well as Cynthia, who were not able to be here tonight. So just a phenomenal team to work with them. And then our program director, Ben Lutz from YPFP, the Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, and also globally for sort of putting us together and challenging us to advocate, to influence global youth priorities. Beyond that, I think what's really important to know about the Y20 is that it's an opportunity for young people to stress test ideas, to become better advocates, and to meet each other face to face, to dialogue with respect, to disagree often. And I think we may get into some of those examples as it related to different tracks But fundamentally, we had to uphold core values and principles as a delegation. The US side is independent sector civil driven, whereas some countries appoint their delegations by a government. So there's a lot of competing interests, identities, uncertainties when you go into this international space.
Thank you so much. So I know that the Y20 it's a huge time commitment, a huge commitment of resources. And so I'm curious for each of you, what drew you to make this commitment to apply and really put your best foot forward to represent the United States? And Aaron, I'll start with you and then we'll go around the.
Sure. Thanks, Spencer. I think for me, so a little bit about my background is both of my parents emigrated to the United States when they were around high school age, a little bit younger than that. And so I'm a first generation student, second generation immigrant, and my family has always instilled with me kind of these values and morals of service, of giving back to my community. And it wasn't until maybe a couple of years ago when I went for my master's degree that I realized that I wanted to commit to putting that positive impact, positive drive forward for the country. And so I kind of re-geared my career. But suffice to say, it comes from a long, deeply rooted system for me to want to give back to my community, give back to my country, and really over the last year or two, getting involved in youth advocacy and seeing how much more space there is for youth to get involved, to make their voices heard, and for me to try and want to amplify that as a now older youth member.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm so glad that your parents instilled that in you. I think it's something that, a lot of parents do, but a lot of parents don't as well. Elizabeth, I'm curious about for you, what drew you to committing to doing the Y20?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. So 3 things drew me to committing to this wonderful experience. One was the opportunity to actually engage in a very unique type of forum. I've been involved in different type of programs that aim to empower youth. But one of the things I've kind of noticed is you go to this conference, you get excited, and then it kind of fades away, or you try to maintain through projects. But what is very unique about this one is that there's an outcome, there's a communique that comes out of it. So you're able to really see your work be translated and can I capitalize on that even later. So I saw it as a wonderful space for that. The second reason was that you tap into an incredible network and lifelong friendships. I didn't realize how interconnected everybody is, even internationally. I was recently in Morocco for the Dell conference, and there I met people who did this particular opportunity. And so connecting with them and really engaging, maybe we can do this project or this other project, was something that I really, really enjoyed. So I knew that had that potential. And then the last reason is because it would be a great way to become a better negotiator. So there are many ways to negotiate. We negotiate every day, right? When we talk to people, when we talk to our friends, when we want something. So, but in this context, it really puts it out of your comfort zone and makes you kind of continue that muscle of negotiation, because it's something that should always be continuous. So I found it as a great way to do that. So combined, I found it a wonderful opportunity, and also I got to work with this amazing group. So it was a big honor. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I'm going to follow up with you a little bit on some of those questions in the next question, Elizabeth. Pascal, I think you touched on this a little bit in your introduction, but I'd love to hear a little more about, really what drew you to the Y20 and spending the time on it as well.
Well, I really chalk it up to almost like a part-time job. And I think all of us made that commitment to have weekly bilaterals where our delegation met with the delegations from South Africa to Turkey to Brazil, etc. We also then had bilaterals one-on-one in our respective tracks. So that was one sort of commitment that you knew going in that you had to be very serious about. I was specifically drawn to the opportunity to test new ideas. as well as working sort of in economic policy, and having the opportunity to exchange best practices. And I think that's something that is really unique in the relationship building fabric. Fundamentally, I didn't really know a lot about India. And when we're hosted by the Secretariat, they really roll out a red carpet of sorts. The best of their country is on display. And so we are, of course, temporary visitors, but we just get to experience so much of what is sort of this burgeoning country and how it's going to shape the world going forward. So I really was drawn to learn about a new region of the world, to engage directly in a bilateral, in the sense of US-India, and then also to sharpen my understanding of other country politics, and be fundamentally, as Aaron referenced, a patriot. I have a love for country, and to be sort of an ambassador. And it's been really cool for delegates to come into Washington, D.C., and for me to host them and walk them around when they've visited in recent months.
Thank you so much for that answer, Pascal. I think that's really, really enlightening and illuminating. So I'm curious for each of you, to learn more about your experience as a Y20 delegate, both sort of in the lead up, right, to the actual summit and when you were there. And then, Elizabeth, I want to direct this question to you first, because I'm curious, you're talking about dialogue. And so I'm curious about what your greatest accomplishments you feel like you were from being a Y20 delegate, but also what you think the biggest challenges were, right, that you faced in this, environment where you might agree or disagree with some people, but you might have to walk out at the end of the day with a unilateral, with a statement that is from everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I think at the core of everything, our track in particular was very complicated because peace building encompasses all tracks in one. And I think that's something we all acknowledged, and how interconnected everything is. So it was not just, okay, we're going to achieve peace by doing this. It was, what are the cross-cutting policies that we should prioritize? And because, as it was mentioned earlier, people are selected by sometimes a government, sometimes in a particular organization. There was a push for particular wording. So that was the challenge to me. I think I underestimated how much the wording played a big role. But through this, I got to really realize how sensitive it is and how mindful we should be. So to me, that was the greatest challenge. Well, one of the great success was that we were able to, because you have this time before the actual summit begins, to find areas that you really want to work on. So one of the areas that I was able to work with, like four other countries, including France, was on space, and ensuring like outer space for peaceful purposes and interest of all states. And it was an area that was new to me, but because it had so much support, an area that when the negotiations came about, it was able to finally make it in, even though it was a bit tough. So things of this sort. So I believe those were the main challenges, but also the great success. And at the end of the day, the most thing that was emphasized was that in any negotiation, like, there should be respect, and there should be consideration for the other person. And once that was established, everything didn't go as smooth, but it went as smooth as possible. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. And Aaron and Pascal, I want to give you an opportunity to chime in on terms of what you feel like the greatest challenges you faced in your tracks were, and maybe what the greatest accomplishments you had.
Pascal, do you want to go, or do you want me to venture forth? Okay. Yeah, mine was youth in democracy and governance. And as you can imagine, amongst, the 20 largest nations, not all of them are, Jeffersonian democracies like we have here in the United States. So a lot of people have, as Elizabeth was mentioning, different viewpoints, different ideas of what democracy, what youth engagement in that context looks like. So it was definitely challenging in terms of language. There was certain languages or certain words that we had to argue about and fight about of, should this be included? Should this terminology be included? But I think the biggest, for me with my background, for me, the biggest part of youth and democracy is inclusion, whether that be you're from an immigrant family, or if you're from, from a poor community or whatever, everybody has a right to have a say in their leadership and their governance. And so part of that extends to actually, from the youth side, we started the motion to get the African Union into the G20, which was a landmark decision. G20 will now include the African Union going forward, just having that inclusion. But I think our biggest wins were also for lowering voting age, increasing civic education for students, and just, putting it out there that government should pay attention to the youth and include them in, the discussions and decisions that will govern their futures. So yeah, that was our biggest wins.
In relation to my track, The Future of Work, Industry 4.0, Innovation, 21st Century Skills, very timely topic given the AI revolution, and what is sort of the marriage between technology and the workforce, also off of the back of a global public health crisis, where fundamentally the workforce paradigm has shifted. I think as it related to our track, we were the first to finish our negotiations at the main summit. And so we were very proud of that because we were able to set aside some differences, sort of those red tape moments, because to pass your track communique, you have to have unanimous consent. So a lot of individuals, whether they were from the United Arab Emirates as an observing country or the EU delegate, over time made concessions as to what we were advocating for. So when our team disseminated and attempted to crowdsource perspectives from American youth to inform sort of our policy suggestions, what I initially went to the table with was not 100% agreed upon, because there's a difference in sort of the economic state combined with just our evolution economically, in contrast to some of the sort of the emerging nation states. And then maybe a challenge for our track was a lot of the pre-summit work. We took that very seriously. We met every Saturday for almost 4 months straight, and coordinating across 10 plus time zones, it's a little tricky. So I think that's the one thing, maybe a little bit more of a lighthearted moment, that if you do apply in the future, which we hope you do, that you recognize that a lot of your weekends will be committed to sort of the research and stakeholder mapping formation of this work.
I'm curious for all three of you, right? As you mentioned, the G20, right, is a really diverse group of nations, right? Some of whom the US does not get along with very well. And I'm curious about how you handled, being in the room with delegates who might come from countries that are not democracies, right? Might be appointed by their governments, have a government line that they really, really want to push forward. But you all managed to come right to these unanimous decisions at the end of the day. And so I'm curious about how you really handle that. It's just sort of on a personal level, getting to know these people and working with them and figuring out a way to sort of get past bluster to interact with people as other human beings.
I think I'll maybe just jump in here and give Pascal and Elizabeth a little bit of time to think. Yeah, just harkening back to what I was saying, democracy, very sensitive topic, especially when you include the US's perspective in world history and just the perspective of other nations. So there is kind of that contentious past that you have to address when you go into the room for the first time or when you meet for the first time through the bilaterals. But one thing that really surprised me is when we all arrived in India after about 7 or 8 months of pre-summit negotiating, meeting, all that sort of thing. After a lot of, like you said, kind of pre-talks and kind of figuring out where everybody's stance is, once we got wheels on the ground, everyone was very committed to passing the communique and really having, as Pascal mentioned, very open and honest dialogue with each other. Sometimes it can get a little heated and everybody has to take 5 minutes to maybe cool off, especially for our track. But I have to say, it really inspired me. I've always been a youth advocate, but just being in the room and seeing how many young people are just so passionate and dedicated to the issues that we face today, very complex issues. I'm at the age cap for the program, which is 30. But we had a member from Australia in our group who just finished high school, right? And he was so engaged and so passionate. And so it just comes from all different backgrounds and levels. And you really get to feel that feeling of pulling together and really working to solve these very unique and difficult issues.
And I would add that it was important to not lose the focus of what this conference really is about. Of course, a communique is the outcome, and we've been working really hard to negotiate and be on the same page, but also the fact that we're there to build those friendships, right? So one of the things our delegation did when we were meeting with other countries was not necessarily start with like, what are your policy recommendations? What are your what are your main priorities? It was mostly, okay, getting to know others as like from a personal level. And I think that helped a lot to build kind of a bit of trust. And I know trust cannot be built just in one call or two calls. That's why we had multiple calls. And make sure that we are going there because yes, we want that outcome, but we also want the outcome of friendships. And because out of this group, a lot of the people there are very influential people or will become influential people. And so they're individuals that will enrich our network, not only professionally, but personally. And so that was something I kept reminding myself. And so I wanted to make sure to add to that.
I think, Spencer, it's important to note that, as a US Y20 delegate, you are not towing a specific party line. We are not representing the White House foreign policy view. We do our best to, go across the ideological spectrum of what is good or poor foreign policy. But fundamentally, as Elizabeth alluded to, we recognize that maybe there are opponents at the macro or micro scale, but we're there to shore up alliances from the next generation. And the rising generation has a very different opportunity to begin working with one another, maybe 20, 40, 60 years in advance of a tipping point. So yes, you do have some ambiguity and complexity and sometimes emotions takes over. But I think the setting and what the American team did a really fine job at in all of our tracks was just maturity and practicing sort of emotional intelligence to not engage solely with a single coalition. And I think we discussed that strategically as a team to be hyper cognizant of our responsibility to connect with every delegate from every country. And so that was an effective deployed tactic. And it was surprising who you walked out of the negotiations and we're like, you know what, maybe that assumption was incorrect, or maybe it was right. So it was a lot of fun to have the chance to be in a nonpartisan setting that is really sort of the U.S. delegation.
Pascal, I'll follow up for that, but I'll give everybody the chance to answer this. I mean, did you ever find that you sort of came to an agreement on something in your track and your room, but then found that that was in conflict with some of your fellow US delegates at any point? That's sort of something that you might have agreed upon, almost maybe like made something that somebody else was working on incompatible. And was there any, therefore, conflict within the delegation that you then had to work on? Or was that sort of the tracks are so different that that wasn't really that big of an issue?
To the best of my recall, we did not have any struggles collectively. I think we tried to be transparent with one another from the onset. I remember a particular moment, and I hope Aaron can maybe share more specifics. But Aaron saved the day for many, let's say, Western democracies by just an ability to, I don't want to take the story from him because I think it's so wonderful, to identify a fact on a respective minister that we were supposed to do a photo op with, that maybe there was a history of human rights violations. So we were sort of, as a delegation, communicating openly with one another, sort of lending forewarnings if we got a tip per se from a delegate in another room that maybe something was coming in our track. But then again, you're not really trying to compete or silo one another. If that becomes the pace of the room, then nothing gets done. But also, open it to Aaron and Elizabeth. I thought we phenomenally worked together though as a team.
Aaron, I think you have to tell the specifics as much as you can of this story now. I think we need to hear it.
Yeah, it started with how much negotiation was going on. Our schedule was very flexible from day to day. I think it changed probably every time you asked someone or turned around. But early in the morning, the Indian Secretariat was saying, we're going to go to the location early. We're going to have a picture with the chief minister of the region, which is Uttar Pradesh. And on the way there, one of the Australian delegates, who is South Asian by descent, kind of alerted me to the problematic nature of this minister. And so when we arrived, me being aware of it, wanted to spread it to the other groups because, as Pascal mentioned, some of us are civic society, but some of us represent foreign ministries or government positions. And so going around, making sure everybody was aware. And this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier, is we all kind of pull together as a team. So once you meet everyone and you kind of get connected, you really feel connected with the group. It's not just me as the US delegate for this track. It's me as a youth advocate and a youth practitioner. And so we spread the word and we refused to take a picture with this individual, all of us collectively. And they pulled down the photo op. They rushed the minister out after he gave a very brief speech, and he suddenly was very busy and had something else to do. So it's that kind of community building, as Elizabeth was talking about, the connections that you make really solidify while you're on the ground, working there for the 3 straight days.
And Aaron, you talked a little bit about this earlier, but I'm hoping you can all share something that, was there something in your track, right, that was made as a recommendation, right, to the greater G20 that then was implemented, in the G20 Summit?
Yeah, I'll just what I mentioned earlier, the inclusion of the African Union. It was published in the G20's agreement for the full summit, but actually, this is what is still so amazing to me. The South African delegate for Youth in Democracy and Governance, Kurtley, he was a fierce proponent and advocate for Africa's inclusion into the G20. And through negotiation across all. So this was a huge year last year, 2023, because it's the first time we included cross-cutting proposals. So as you were mentioning, Spencer, a lot of these proposals that we were doing touched on other tracks. And so we did our best to put the most prominent, most cross-cutting tracks in the communique at the top. So this is the first time we've ever had a cross-cutting proposals for our communique. And this is also the first time that a youth led initiative made it all the way to the G20, and it resulted in this now inclusion of an entire continent for decision making at the G20, which is one of the premier global forums in the world.
And Elizabeth and Pascal, I just want to ask, were there any recommendations that you made that either were implemented or just that you felt was a really important recommendation, that came from your track that you really felt, you were really proud of and really proud to have put that forward?
Yeah, I can't find the exact one. I was trying to go through the communique right now, but it's specifically on having kind of a representative from the next summit and the after the one that comes afterwards to be able to have some consistency. And I believe that was one that we all shared in our tracks, so that it's not just we have the summit and it's done and then we start again, but there's some consistency and follow up. So I think that was a big it was already reiterated before in the one in India, but the fact that it was brought up again, and also put in a much more higher priority, I think was a big success, because it will be very important for the sustainability of these recommendations to move forward and see actually what is being applied, what is being not applied. So I think that's something that I was very happy about.
In respect to the future of work track, an area that I was very active to advocate for was a skills-first economy. And how do we just continue to increase access, tools, trainings to more deeply engage the workforce? How that really manifested in our track was in a unlearn, relearn, reskill principled theme, where an example of that would be sort of through a cross-border innovation, that we can have more equitable algorithms. So that was something that a lot of countries cared about, especially within this sort of changing technological and turbulent landscape that we have. Another interesting maybe mention is we had unanimous consent to establish a universal gig economy framework. And we wanted to better support worker protections for those who are, working for Uber or Lyft, for example. That did not get adopted at the G20 level, but I thought that that was a very interesting topic of exchange and negotiation for us, because again, each country is at a very different pace of adoption of technology and integrating it into society. So I hope that the universal gig economy framework can sort of find its way back into the dialogue. So for the next, economic future of work focus delegate, please consider raising that again.
So I want to take the time now to move to some of the questions that we've been getting from our audience members during our talk so far. And I really want to start with a fundamental question, which is, for those of our students who are watching this program, how do you become a Y20 or a Y7 delegate? We haven't mentioned the Y7, but it's the equivalent for the G7, which is another grouping of countries. And so how do you get involved with these programs if you're interested? And what's the application process like? Aaron, I'll shoot it to you first.
Sure. Yeah, so as Pascal mentioned, so the United Nations Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, they have branches all over the world. There's some in California, I believe it's San Francisco. There's some in Canada, everywhere in the world. There's a new one that just opened in Tokyo. But essentially, the one in DC is the program directorate for the selection of the Y7 and Y20. So we have a link that you can select. If you're from ages 18 to 30, you're eligible to apply to the program. It's a paper application, so you'll fill out an application first of your experiences, your interests, when the tracks come out, what track you would like to apply to. And I think ours is really interesting in it has a policy recommendation. So what's something that you're passionate about that you might bring forward as a policy recommendation for the G20? I thought that was quite good. And then a series of interviews. So that's the long and short of the process. And that's how you can get involved. But there's so many other ways of, figuring out where you want to experience different parts of international relations, of volunteering, or, part-time jobs. It doesn't have to be just G7 or G20. There's a lot of other options out there as well.
And this is like a technical question, but it's 18 to 30. If somebody's 17 right now, but would be 18 at the time of the conference, do you know if they're eligible? I'm sure there's more information on the website, but I'm just curious about that.
I believe you have to be 18 when you submit the application. Don't quote me on it, but I do believe you have to be 18 to submit the application, because you have to be on the flip side for the age cap. 30 is you have to be 30 years of age to submit your application at the cap, even if it's going into the next year. So if you were, let's say, 30 this year, you would submit the application, and then if it rolled over into the next year, you'd still be eligible.
Fantastic. And then I'm also curious, and any of you can answer this, so you all went to India, right? Is there financial support? Did you have to pay sort of out of your own pocket? Do you get compensated for the time that you spend, this quite significant amount of time that you spend, or is the compensation mostly in experience?
I do want to make just one technical correction. The American delegation is ages 22 to 30. So there is, as Aaron mentioned, some countries that have a policy of 18 up, but the American organizers have a 22 to 30 policy. But to answer your question directly, Spencer, we are a volunteer corps. We do receive partial sponsorship when we are hosted at the main summit. The secretariat, so next year, Brazil, will financially support your housing, your transportation, your meals. That's when you are domestically on the ground. In our case as well, we were funded airfare, surprisingly, which was such a gift for the pre-summit. That is not common for secretariats to host a pre-summit. Unfortunately, due to our work calendars, only one of us was able to attend, and that was Cynthia Yu. And beyond that, you do have the opportunity to have your if you are a student pursuing your undergraduate or graduate studies, you can fundraise, and your higher education institution can sponsor you. So we've had that take place. As well as being working professionals, we have a little bit more flexibility to financially support ourselves and what is sort of this 9 to 12 month commitment. I hope that addresses the question sufficiently.
I think it really does, and thank you for that clarification. And sort of to build on that, I'm curious, a lot of people who are watching this are in high school, right? They're, going to be going to college in the fall or in the following year. And so what advice would each of the three of you give to people who are about to enter this sector or about to enter it, from high school, in terms of what they should be doing in college? What are the ways to get involved? As somebody who is interested in this field and wants to set themselves up for success, maybe to be a Y20 delegate or just to be successful in the foreign policy area as well. And Elizabeth, I want to start with you here because I don't think you've had a chance to answer some of the last questions.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah, I actually came up with a list, so I'll share it in the chat. And there are a number of things because I remember also being a high school student and wanting to get involved with a number of kind of policy related opportunities, but maybe seeing it as very distant in the future. So things that I would say is keep up with current events. Another one is blog or publish a piece on the internet that can inform the US delegation in terms of priorities. Read the actual communique, which I think has been shared in the chat. There's also a lot of cross-cultural programs which open your eyes to working with and getting to know other cultures. And the next one is about Rotary. I'm a big Rotary advocate. So there's the Rotary Youth Leadership Awards, which is kind of a 1-week leadership conference, which is sponsored by the Rotary International, and so it depends where you live, the club would sponsor you to go there. And there's a great sections on negotiation and leadership. And also there's volunteering opportunities through Amnesty International, specifically in the lobbying related initiatives, which is how I got involved as a high school student. And Amnesty International covers these trainings. The funding is covered by them. And you get to actually go across different states in the US to be able to really polish that skill. I think it's a commitment of 2 years though, if they send you to these places. And the last one is there's a number of global essay competitions for high school students. For instance, the University of Tokyo here hosts high school students to come and talk about US-Japan relations. There's for example, the Jazz Conference, right? So these opportunities, which are opening up this year because we're starting the year, are available to high school students. and therefore applying to these it would be very, very nice. So I'm gonna just copy and paste it in the chat right there.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Aaron, I want to ask you the same question.
Yeah, kind of like I was talking about, volunteer, get involved. You know, my interest now, my career now is so far removed from what I thought it was going to be in high school. You know, really take, you know, your time. When I was in high school, I was, you know, at school at 6 a.m. and I was leaving at about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And still doing homework and still doing all the stuff on top of that. Everybody in high school, you have youth, you have energy, right? Use that to really find out what interests you. I know somebody, she advises the UN on climate change strategies, and she started as an economist and became climate aware as, you know, climate disasters affected her community. And she just started volunteering and started from that grassroots level. And she built herself up as an expert in climate change strategy. And now she advises the United Nations. So it's definitely not out of reach for anybody. If you think you have an interest or a passion for a project, you know, dive right in, see how you can help your local. It could even be like a local community garden, food bank. The other second thing that I have is research. When I worked on the House, our member was signing letters for the state's young people who got the State Department scholarship. It's an international scholarship offered for every state, and it allows you to travel abroad and as Elizabeth was mentioning, sharpen those skills, meet new people, be challenged on your perspective. So just research, because there's so much out there for young people that can just pass you by if you're not looking for it.
Pascal, I want to give you the same opportunity as well.
Just the fact that you're here, you're already beginning. When I was in high school, I was predominantly an athlete. I dreamed of being a professional soccer player. And I played in college, but I was not focused on finance, policy, politics, international affairs. So I want to encourage those that maybe are a bit nervous about the future, that you can have a lot of identities, and that's okay, because that creates a stronger practitioner. You know, I'm the son of Egyptian migrants who are my grandparents. My father immigrated from France. I grew up in California, Florida, Minnesota. And so my maybe global view was predominantly tutored from a Euro-Arabic family, and what is just living in different regions of America and enjoying the polyglot that we have. But if I had to leave, you know, sort of three pieces of advice for those applying and for those going forward: be an experimentalist, really harness that scientific approach to draft a hypothesis, to engage with new evidence, and to produce a conclusion, but don't be afraid to change your opinion, is number two. And three, to read profusely. Follow think tanks like Atlantic Council or Carnegie International. Attend local events. With the way the internet is today, build a LinkedIn account, get on Twitter. You can learn about people's careers so quickly. Get on ChatGPT and just type in, who is Henry Kissinger? And you'll get a great bio. And then you can begin to map yourself in relation to that individual steps. So again, just read profusely, be an experimentalist, and don't be afraid to change your opinion, because it should be changed along the way.
Thank you so much for all for your fantastic answers. And I want to take it back to the summit itself for a second, right? And focus back on there. And I'm curious, you know, Elizabeth, you've mentioned sort of the, you know, the friendships you've made and the networking. And I'm curious for all of you, what the biggest impact was of being a Y20 delegate as you as a person, as a policy practitioner, and what surprised you the most at the end of the day? Pascal, I'm going to throw it to you first, because I see Aaron and Elizabeth have the look of contemplation.
Please, personal impact. One very special moment for me personally was I actually got to India a few days before the main summit to sort of adjust to the time zone, one. And two, I had the opportunity to travel in northern India to Lucknow, and the India Secretariat had myself and an Argentinian delegate on India's Independence Day speak to 50 of India's brightest high schoolers and college students. And they came from all around the country. And I asked each of these, young Indians, what do you want Americans to know about your culture, your society, your history? And each of them said the same reply, that we are a diverse society ethnically, politically, racially, culturally, etc. And that was sort of a light bulb moment for me to recognize just how unique this country, that country of India is. And then just to follow up that personal story, I have since the end of the main summit had the opportunity to continue to engage with my track. We actually have a monthly, just sort of, let's say, Saturday happy hour check-in at 8 a.m. EST. And so we want to stay in touch and share messages of encouragement with each other. And that has left a very unique impression that people care about my well-being, that people care about my future, and also are curious about my next steps. So that's been very personally rewarding.
Aaron?
Yeah, I think personal impact, it really, and I was kind of talking about this earlier, really was such a energizing experience in terms of, even though we worked pretty much 3 days straight, I think I slept maybe less than 4 hours those whole 3 days, but energizing in the fact that, I came home so invigorated with the connections that I had made. And like I was talking about before, the passion and dedication that you see very plainly across all the delegates, all the delegations, regardless of our disagreements, regardless of our experiences, we come together and we try and overcome these challenges, because a lot of these, like climate change, like the future of work, right, are going to be some of the deciding factors of our quality of life for our future. And so it was just such an enlightening experience to see, you and me may disagree on what to call democracy, or you and me may disagree on, this statistic versus that report. But at the end of the day, we're humans, we all live on this planet, and we're all trying to work together to create a better future for not just ourselves, but for the generations after.
And for me, I think it's so many things in a combination of both responses already. For me, the biggest takeaway is really seeing the whole process. I think when I applied initially, I would be like, I did have expectations, but after going through the whole experience from meeting this wonderful group to kind of setting up the calls, and then going to the actual summit, even in the pre-summit, coming back, talking about it, strategizing, going back, this whole process made me feel more passionate about the outcomes, and also more appreciative of the process towards kind of crafting policy that does reflect the needs and so forth. We in our track, we did launch a survey to get to know the priorities of youth in the US and what they would like reflected. So for me, that was a very, very important part of the process that I valued. And that data then informed how we are going to better represent the people that we're there to represent. So that was something that I really enjoyed, and something that I will continue doing. Living in Japan, I have been able to stay in touch with at least 2 delegates from Japan, and we both live in Tokyo, so hang out, become friends, and so that's been really rewarding. And even if I'm not in Japan, even people who are not Japanese, still be able to engage with them in other opportunities. So I really enjoyed that.
And I'm curious, obviously you all made a lot of wonderful connections with your fellow delegates from this Y20. Did you find that you were able to connect with former Y20 delegates, right? There were five of you, this year. And I'm curious, do you have a community of people who have done this in the past who may now be in roles in government? Or were there people who were mentoring you along the way and sort of sharing the lessons that they learned as well?
So we do have a strong alumni network, and our director, Ben Lutz, actually within the first week of our delegation being assembled, introduced us to the Y7 and Y20 delegations of past. And then we had sort of free reign to schedule calls with them, and to just get insights as to their experiences. I think something that is really cool as well, that I would really encourage future delegations to do, is to work, as best as you can in tandem with the G7 Y7 delegation, because there's a lot of similar priorities. Obviously, the scale is very different, of 7 countries versus 20 plus observing nations. Yet there's still a lot of cross-pollination to be had.
And I'm curious for all of you, has being a Y20 delegate had an impact on your career, or has it even changed what your career goals are, in terms of refocusing what's possible or showing you new opportunities? And Aaron, I'll start with you for this one.
Okay, yeah. I think yes, it definitely did. In just the experience, right? I think I saw a question of like how many delegates are there. So it depends on year to year. This year, India opened a 5th track, so there were 5 of us, so 5 from each country. But really, you are, representing your country, and you have such a unique opportunity to do that as the sole person. You own the portfolio of peacebuilding, or future of work, or youth and democracy, climate change, health, right? You really get to own that in this field. And I think that's a really valuable experience. But I think also some of the other delegations were joking because I work for the Biden-Harris administration at the White House. Himaja, who's our head of delegation, also shortly after got an offer from the White House. So it definitely does impact your professional life, open doors and opportunities for you that you might not otherwise have. It's a great opportunity, not just personally, but professionally.
Yeah, Pascal, would you like to, or Elizabeth, would either of you like to jump in on that as well?
Well, I like to add that for me it definitely has, because as Aaron said, you get the opportunity to hold that title, right? So if you're able to go to events and speak on a particular topic, that's part of your that's part of how they present you. And I think that also holds a lot of responsibility, so that we're able to clearly inform about the particular policies that we did advocate for, and answer questions, and be engaged. So for me, at least in Japan, there's been opportunities to be able to share knowledge, or share our experiences like we're doing now here. And I think it also has helped me decide to incorporate myself into more opportunities similar to this one, because it opens your mind to seeing, okay, I want to I want to get more involved and go much more deeper on this particular issue, because you're studying so many topics at the same time. So for me, that's how it has impacted me.
Pascal, do you have anything to add there?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with what Aaron and Elizabeth stated. Again, the G20 is this intergovernmental forum, and it is the preeminent body for international coordination of economic policy. And so for us to participate in that fabric, I walked away with a better understanding of how the world works, how it doesn't work, and how it should work. And I was even able to stay on after our main summit and participate in the B20, which is the convening of business leaders globally. So there's a lot of different official engagement groups similar to the Y20 that engage with this intergovernmental body from their respective industry points of view. So I'm really grateful to have had this experience because it challenged me to challenge others as well as pushed me out of my comfort zone.
And we're just have 5 minutes left, so I just want to ask you all one final question, which is we were talking about how you had the sort of cross-cutting, right, of these tracks. And I'm curious about how you coordinated with each other and how you worked together on the overlap, right? To, as we were talking about earlier, make sure there wasn't conflict. And just, did that involve, doing research together and, figuring out your positions together? Sort of what the day-to-day of figuring that out was, so you're sort of all on the same side of it. Elizabeth, I'll start with you because you're in the upper corner of my screen.
Yeah, I think for the cross-cutting policies, at least in my track, we in terms of the U.S. delegation, I think as I mentioned earlier, we were we're on the same page about what we wanted at least to be included, because the cross-cutting policies, of course, are part of the communique, but they're very important because that's the first thing you look at if you open the document. But within my particular track, we really looked at how, for example, in terms of policies surrounding women, if the W20 has already kind of pushed for something specifically on that then would not necessarily be as helpful to still include it in that. So we looked at what other groups have put in theirs and also what the previous communique has had, and also ways to condense it to make sure that everything is as much as possible is included.
Pascal, I think I saw you about to unmute yourself earlier. Do you want to add something to that?
Sure. So, I mean, from a future of work perspective, a principle that I really advocated for was fairness across generations. And that was something that every country could agree on. And so we actually were able to get sort of that language in as a value, and how to further then ultimately promote more youth into leading positions in government entities and on boards of directors. So that was one unique sort of track consolidated agreement that then entered the cross-cutting. And again, just a big shout out to our head delegate, Himaja, who sat for an entire night, literally no joke, and sharpened out all the details with other head delegates. So that's another maybe component to mention. For those considering to apply, that there is, the delegation, and then there is one individual that takes on just a little bit more responsibility as the head delegate. And so we were very fortunate to have someone who sacrificed a little bit extra than the four of us.
So we're almost out of time. So I just want to ask the three of you if there's anything we haven't touched on, any parting words you'd like to give to the students who've taken.
I'll just quickly say, if you guys are, as Pascal said, if you guys are already here, you've got a head start. Stay engaged, stay passionate. That's something that nobody can ever take away for you, is your passion and your dedication to things that matter to you and things that are important to your community. So always stay engaged, always stay open to new opportunities. And yeah, best of luck to you guys. We'll see. The US will host probably in the next couple of years. So we'll be looking for you guys who attended this event to be joining the future cohorts coming up.
I totally agree. And I think it's never too late or never too early. And some advice that was given to me that I really, really liked as a high school student was that if you're an introvert, master the art of asking questions. If you're an extrovert, master the art of storytelling. You could do both as well. So, and you could do that from high school, and it's going to grow as you continue with your journey. Thank you.
Yeah, just a very special thank you to you, Spencer, and Rachel, World Affairs Council LA. And maybe just a final thought to share with the wonderful young leaders that are attending tonight is, don't be afraid to transform humanity's prospects, and dialogue to achieve common ground. Just have fun as well. and uphold your ethic and your values. And I think ultimately we can have another great delegation in Brazil. And we look forward to being available to any of you who have further questions.
Well, thank you so much, Aaron, Pascal, and Elizabeth, for this incredibly insightful conversation and for taking the times out of your evenings and mornings to Elizabeth, who is in Japan. For our students, we hope to see you at an in-person program to this year. For our delegates, I hope if you find yourself in Los Angeles, you will get a chance to say hello to us in person. And for our young professionals who are joining us, we hope you consider membership in the LA World Affairs Council and Town Hall if you haven't already. And you can learn more on our website. So thank you all again and have a fantastic rest of your day.